March 8, 2018, 2:30 a.m. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. A convoy of armored vehicles rolled silently through the darkness. No headlights, no radio chatter, just the low rumble of engines and the crunch of tires on gravel. Inside, one of the vehicles sat members of the 02 unit, one of Afghanistan's most elite paramilitary forces. They wore American-supplied night vision goggles, carried American weapons, and they were accompanied by at least 10 U.S. Special Operations soldiers who'd been seconded to the CIA. Their target, a compound in a remote farming village. Intelligence, passed down through classified channels, indicated a Taliban commander was sheltering there. High-value target, kill or capture, standard mission. At 3:15 a.m., the convoy stopped half a kilometer from the compound. The operators moved on foot through the darkness. Silent, professional. They'd done this hundreds of times before. They breached the compound walls, separated the women from the men, cleared the rooms systematically, and in one of the back rooms, they found their target. Except it wasn't a Taliban commander. It was a 26-year-old staff member of an Afghan NGO, a civilian aid worker. He was dragged to another part of the house. Then the shooting started. When the sun rose over that village, 6 hours later, 5 men were dead. Not militants, not insurgents, just farmers. Brothers, sons, civilians who happened to be in the wrong place when the raid went wrong. This is the story of the 0 units, CIA-backed death squads that conducted thousands of night raids across Afghanistan. Operations so classified that even Congress didn't know the full scope. Missions where the lines of accountability were so obscured that no one had to answer when innocent people died. This is the classified war within the war. The midnight raids the Pentagon won't acknowledge, and the body count they buried in classified files. To understand what happened in Afghanistan, you need to understand what the 0 units were. Around 2008, 7 years into the war in Afghanistan, the CIA established a series of paramilitary strike forces. They were officially part of Afghanistan's National Directorate of Security, the NDS, the country's primary intelligence agency. But they didn't follow normal chains of command. They didn't answer to Afghan military leadership. They didn't operate under standard rules of engagement. They were recruited, trained, equipped, and overseen by the CIA, funded by American black budgets, supplied with American weapons, night vision equipment, and helicopters. And they operated alongside U.S. Special Operations Forces, primarily Army Rangers, who'd been seconded to the CIA specifically for these missions. There were multiple 0 units, each designated by number. The 1st unit, the 2nd unit, the 3rd unit, the most elite, most secretive paramilitary forces in Afghanistan. Positions in these units were coveted. The pay was better than regular Afghan forces. The training was superior, modeled on U.S. Navy SEALs and Delta Force. And most importantly, service in a 0 unit could help you immigrate to the United States after the war. But there was a darker side. The 0 units specialized in night raids. Quick, brutal operations designed to capture or kill high-value targets while they slept. The psychological impact was devastating. Entire villages lived in fear. Families barricaded their doors at night. Children woke screaming at the sound of distant helicopters. Between December 2010 and February 2011, coalition forces conducted nearly 20 night raids per night across Afghanistan. That's approximately 600 per month. Most were carried out by either JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, or the CIA-backed 0 units. And here's what the military won't tell you. In 50 to 60% of those raids, they didn't capture or kill the intended target. They got the wrong person or found no militants at all. In one documented case, over 80% of captured terrorists from night raids were released within weeks because there wasn't enough evidence they were actually insurgents. But by then, the damage was done. Homes destroyed, families traumatized, and in too many cases, innocent people dead. Let me walk you through how these raids work. Intelligence would come from multiple sources, sometimes satellite surveillance, sometimes signals intelligence intercepted by NSA assets, sometimes tips from local informants, people who might have personal grudges, tribal rivalries, or simply wanted the bounty money offered for Taliban locations. That intelligence would be passed to the Zero Units or JSOC forces. A target would be designated, a raid planned, and in the middle of the night, the operators would strike. They used American helicopters, Chinooks and Black Hawks, for insertion. They had American drones providing real-time surveillance overhead. They had American intelligence analysts monitoring communications. And they had American special operations soldiers on the ground alongside Afghan forces. The raids followed a pattern: surround the compound, breach the walls or doors with explosives, storm inside with overwhelming force, separate men from women, a particularly offensive violation of Afghan cultural norms. Search every room, detain anyone who matched the description of the target, and if there was resistance, open fire. The problem was the intelligence. Too often, it was wrong, fatally wrong. In March 2018, the raid I described earlier targeted the home of an NGO staff member. The Zero Unit soldiers separated the family. They took the staff member's brother to another part of the house. Then, according to survivors, they executed him, shot him multiple times at close range. When family members tried to intervene, they were beaten. When the shooting was over, the operators left. No apologies, no explanations. The family was told their brother had been a Taliban sympathizer. He wasn't. He'd never been involved with the Taliban. He worked for a humanitarian organization, but the intelligence said otherwise. And in the classified world of night raids, bad intelligence didn't matter. There was no accountability, no investigation, no consequences. Journalist Lindsay Billing spent 3 years documenting just one Zero Unit, the 02, over a 4-year period from 2017 to 2020. What she found was horrifying. At least 452 civilians were killed in 107 raids she investigated, and that number is almost certainly an undercount. Many raids occurred in remote villages where proper documentation was impossible. Many families were too terrified to report deaths. Billing interviewed survivors. She visited over 30 raid sites. She spoke with members of the 02 unit itself, Afghan soldiers who participated in the killings and later admitted their guilt. These deaths happened at our hands. One soldier told her, "I've participated in many raids, and there have been hundreds of raids where someone is killed and they are not Taliban or ISIS, and where no militants are present at all." Another soldier described the psychological toll. "In war, nobody wins. I have caused unforgivable pain on my people. We can't ignore these deaths. Our minds are damaged too. So are the Americans." But perhaps most chilling was what a former U.S. Special Operations soldier told Billing early in her investigation. No one would give a shit about the killing of Afghan civilians. He was right. Here's where it gets dark. Here's where you understand why these operations remained classified for so long. The Zero Units operated under a CIA program, not a military chain of command. The legal distinction is critical. When the U.S. military conducts operations, they're governed by military law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and international humanitarian law. There are rules. Oversight. Accountability mechanisms. Congress receives detailed briefings. Civilian casualties must be reported. But CIA operations, different rules. The agency operates under Title 50 authority, covert action, rather than Title 10 military operations. The oversight is minimal. The reporting requirements are looser. And when the CIA lends U.S. soldiers to their operations, like the Rangers who accompanied zero-unit raids, those soldiers fall into a legal gray zone. They're not operating under military command. They're temporarily assigned to the CIA, which means their actions don't appear in military casualty reports. They don't trigger the same investigative protocols. They're part of a classified war where accountability is deliberately obscured. Congressional aides and former Intelligence Committee staffers have stated they don't believe Congress received a complete picture of CIA operations in Afghanistan. The briefings were vague. The casualty numbers were downplayed. The civilian deaths were reclassified. Jesselyn Radek, a national security attorney who represented whistleblowers on Afghanistan war crimes, explained how the system worked. There is not any real desire from the Pentagon or the executive branch to track civilian casualties accurately. She described seeing official accounts where children killed by mistaken raids were classified as TTES on terrorists in training, not civilians, not innocent victims, enemies, combatants, legitimate targets. If you label everyone you kill as an enemy, then you never have a civilian casualty problem. In 2019, Human Rights Watch published a devastating report on the zero units. They documented extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances, indiscriminate airstrikes, attacks on medical facilities, multiple violations of international humanitarian law. The report included testimony from Afghan officials, civil society activists, healthcare workers, journalists, and community elders. All described the same pattern. Abusive raids had become a daily fact of life. Entire communities lived in terror. One diplomat familiar with zero-unit operations was quoted in the report calling them death squads. But here's what's important. The CIA and U.S. government denied all allegations. No accountability, no investigations, no acknowledgement that anything had gone wrong. The night raids continued, the body count grew, and the classified files got thicker. Then, in 2017, the Trump administration made a critical change to targeting directives. They authorized Afghan special forces, including the zero units, to call in airstrikes even without U.S. forces present to identify targets. That meant the units could now rely entirely on local Afghan intelligence sources, the same sources that had been providing faulty information for years, and request American airstrikes on residential buildings. The civilian death toll spiked. Entire families were killed in their homes. Wedding parties, funerals, religious gatherings. And because there were fewer U.S. ground forces present, there was less accurate information about who was actually in those buildings when the bombs fell. In August 2021, the United States withdrew from Afghanistan after 20 years of war. The Taliban retook control of the country in a matter of days. The zero units were disbanded. Some members escaped to Pakistan or Iran. Others went into hiding inside Afghanistan. And thousands, including many who'd worked with the CIA and U.S. Special Operations, applied for evacuation to the United States under Operation Allies Welcome, later renamed Enduring Welcome. The U.S. admitted nearly 200,000 Afghans. About 40% received special immigrant visas, specifically designed for Afghan nationals who aided American forces during the war. Many of those were former zero-unit operators. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to discuss. We brought members of CIA-backed death squads to the United States. Men who participated in raids that killed civilians, operators who conducted extrajudicial executions, soldiers who, by multiple accounts and investigations, committed war crimes. And we did it because the alternative was leaving them to face Taliban retribution, because they'd worked with us, because we owed them protection, but we never held them accountable for what they did. We never investigated the raids. We never prosecuted the killings. We just brought them here and hoped nobody would ask questions. In January 2025, one of those former Zero Unit operators, identified as Mohammed Amin Lakanwal, was arrested in connection with a shooting in Washington, D.C. He'd reportedly worked with the Zero 2 Unit, the same paramilitary force Lindsay Billing spent years investigating. The incident reignited questions about who exactly the U.S. evacuated from Afghanistan, who we gave visas to, who we allowed into the country without fully vetting their backgrounds. But here's the deeper problem. We can't properly vet people when their service records are classified, when their operations were conducted under CIA black programs, when the missions they participated in were deliberately hidden from oversight. The Zero Units were created to fight terrorism, to target Taliban leaders, to disrupt insurgent networks. But according to a 1971 Pentagon study of a similar CIA program in Vietnam, the infamous Phoenix program that used kill-capture raids against the Viet Cong, only 3% of those killed or captured were actually full or probationary Viet Cong members above district level. 97% were civilians, innocents, people caught in a brutal campaign that created more enemies than it eliminated. The same pattern repeated in Afghanistan. Every botched raid created new insurgent recruits. Every civilian death turned families against coalition forces. Every night, raid that killed an innocent person handed the Taliban a propaganda victory. As one Army Ranger told Billing, "You go on night raids, make more enemies, then you gotta go on more night raids for the more enemies you now have to kill." An endless cycle, fueled by faulty intelligence, enabled by lack of oversight, perpetuated by a classified system that allowed no one to be held accountable when operations went wrong. Today, the CIA refuses to discuss the Zero Units. The operations remain classified. The casualty numbers are disputed. The full scope of civilian deaths will probably never be known. Lindsay Billing's investigation, 3 years of work, over 30 raid sites visited, hundreds of interviews, represents the most comprehensive documentation of Zero Unit operations that exists, and it's almost certainly incomplete. Most raids occurred in remote areas where documentation was impossible. Most families were too terrified to come forward. Most villages had no records, no witness statements, no evidence beyond the bodies buried in unmarked graves. The Pentagon claims night raids were effective, that they disrupted Taliban operations, that they targeted legitimate threats.